During my Bernie Sanders video, I briefly touched on the Green New Deal, which is, in essence, a great big job creation plan, not unlike that of FDR's New Deal, which intends to create a huge green energy infrastructure and create an estimated 20 million jobs. Bernie's official policy, and the policy of many green parties across the world, is that nuclear is not the end-all be-all of energy, and they turn instead to solar and to wind. I wanted to discuss in that earlier video briefly the prospects of solar versus nuclear, the advantages and disadvantages of each, but I found that the topic couldn't fit in the pacing, so rather than compress it all into a 4-minute section, I will dedicate this video to exploring the now decades-old question: solar or nuclear? As it stands in the United States, the Energy Information Administration reports that in 2023 around 28% of energy consumption is coal, 38% is natural gas, 19% is nuclear, and 20% is renewable. That means over half is fossil fuels, and if you include nuclear in that, we're not doing the greatest in that field. After Trump's recent declaration that greenhouse gases are not a problem, coal might see a small revival. The difference between coal and nuclear is that nuclear is both more expensive to set up and maintain, but also far more efficient and actually produces less pollution and even less radiation, believe it or not. Coal ultimately is very unclean and not very efficient. It carried us through the infancy of the Industrial Revolution, but we have outgrown it. Nuclear was always the natural next step. Now, you can't necessarily consider it a fossil fuel, but it is generally using uranium, which comes out of the ground, same as coal, oil, and natural gas. It can use thorium, but that's a story for another day. Uranium, however, is actually a finite resource, believe it or not. There's only so much of it, just like oil, and I may be dead by the time we run out, but that's no reason not to plan for the future. The real argument that there is between nuclear proponents and renewable proponents is often that nuclear is dangerous or that the material for it is finite, which, understandable criticism. But if we're working on pure technicalities, so is the material for solar and for wind. Your average solar panel is made of about 95% crystalline silicone, which is encased in glass and polymer. Of course, then also wiring requires copper, and the batteries to store excess energy require lithium. All these materials are also not infinite, and solar panels do eventually need to be replaced. Polymers are not always plastics, but for mass production, you can assume plastics are utilized as well. Plastics take a very long time to break down, and may even be more harmful than nuclear waste, given that we see plastics in our bloodstream, but not uranium. It sounds terrifying, but let's put it into perspective. The planet we live on will always be finite. The reality is that some things are more finite than others. Barely 1% of the Earth's surface is covered in developments, leaving around 32% of natural untamed land. For us to encapsulate the soil under urban development, we would be looking at needing to multiply the population by an estimated 30 times over. So land isn't really an issue, and we find new deposits of material all the time, so that isn't necessarily going to be an issue either for a very long time. But at current consumption rates, assuming no new deposits are found, uranium will run out in around 90 to 130 years from now. Current oil consumption and reserves, assuming no new deposits are found, say that we will run out of oil between 2052 and 2070. Where have we heard that before? Natural gas also is expected to last 50 years as well, and coal will last over a century at current consumption and production rates. That's really not that long if you consider the ongoing march of time. Now, silicone, the main component of solar panels, is actually the second most abundant resource in the Earth's crust, so it actually doesn't really matter. Theoretically, we can make solar panels until the sun explodes, which hopefully by then we've moved on to other planets, but these other resources are quite finite, and Finding new reserves is not guaranteed to produce results. Assuming that when and if you run out of uranium, you can switch to thorium, nuclear still has many centuries of use ahead of it as well. But oil, coal, and most importantly natural gas, which much of the world relies on for something as simple as home heating, will eventually run out potentially within our lifetime. This is why the push for alternatives is so important, and besides, the alternatives are actually more efficient and cost-effective anyways. Let me show you some diagrams. There are various ways to determine efficiency, but assuming efficiency can be determined by measuring cost per a metric of output, we can acquire a uniform basis across multiple energy sources. LCO, or levelized cost of energy, alongside LCOS, which is storage, and if you want to get more complex, LACE, levelized avoided cost, help to pin this down, but the measurements are imperfect at best. Nonetheless, we'll use what tools are at our disposal. The Energy Information Administration's 2022 estimates are 4 years outdated, but they still paint a good picture. Wind power on the ground makes 1 kilowatt per 1,718 USD. Solar photovoltaic is 1,327 per kilowatt, and if using storage for overflow, it's 1,748 USD per kilowatt. The National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, usually has their estimates across a range, often a lower and a higher range. Now, nuclear per kilowatt, according to both the NREL and the EIA, is 3 to 4 times more expensive than solar and wind, with the EIA estimates saying $6,695 to $7,547, and NREL estimates at $7,442 and $7,989. That's actually more expensive than coal as well, even with emission standards modifications. Hydropower is around half that, according to the EIA, or a third, according to NREL, but it can be up to 3 times as expensive. How can that be? Looking at this handy table here shows that the NREL and the EIA seem to vastly disagree on cost, and that some energy sources have huge ranges that make an estimate on price nearly redundant to make. Geothermal is one of the most efficient after nuclear following capacity factor, but the NREL estimates show it being just as expensive on the low end or up to 8 times more expensive on the high end as nuclear. Meanwhile, the EIA shows geothermal at 3,000 per kilowatt. So something is wrong here. Obviously, this is because of the difference in measurements. Both of these measurements are American done and government funded. The reality of the solar versus nuclear argument is one hat that I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off of, and you should probably sit down, because if you're really invested in this argument, it's an answer you don't want to hear. There is no best option. Nuclear has its best use cases. Solar has its best use cases. Nuclear is best near bodies of water, major lakes, rivers, and reservoirs, which allow access to water without much need for energy to get it there. A reactor is boiling water to make energy. Without easy access to water, you're in trouble. Some of you may have said, why would Japan put a nuclear reactor in Fukushima, a city on the coast, a coast that gets hit by tsunamis every year? Are they stupid? No. They're a gigantic mountain chain the length of the eastern seaboard. If you put a reactor on a mountain, can you imagine the logistics of getting water up that mountain into the reaction chamber? That makes it unusable in specific cases. Placing it on the coast was a necessity for the plant to be efficient. Around where I live in Alabama, there's an FDR-era relic, the Tennessee Valley Authority. They manage a lot of energy across Tennessee and northern Alabama, and among these are power plants and dams. The Gunnersville Dam was created in 1939 by the TVA, which created a 73-mile, 117-kilometer-long reservoir, but it also created a maritime economy for its namesake city, Guntersville, and it created 140,400 kilowatts of power per year. The TVA likewise created Wheeler Dam, another giant artificial reservoir. These dams not only made the Tennessee River navigable for trade, but they opened the door for a maritime economy never before afforded to the region. The busiest port on the Tennessee River is now in Decatur, Alabama, situated on Wheeler Lake. But the reservoirs don't just provide hydroelectric power, economic and trade development as well as flood control. But Wheeler Lake also feeds the Browns Ferry nuclear plant, the third largest plant in the United States, and the unfinished Bellefonte nuclear plant would have been yet another facility feeding from the artificial Guntersville reservoir. Wheeler Dam itself can generate a whopping 411,000 kilowatts yearly, and it was built in 1936. The reservoir it made feeds Browns Ferry, which produces a further 3.8 gigawatts, aka 3.8 million kilowatts. Combine Wheeler Dam, Guntersville Dam, and theoretically tack the canceled Bellefonte plant on there, and you're looking at a combined 6.9 gigawatts of energy production just within Alabama's portion of the Tennessee River. That is a massive amount of energy production, able to power 5 million U.S. homes, or 70% of New York City's power demand, or at least 3 supermassive AI-born generation centers. The average overall energy use in Alabama is 16.3 gigawatts, with peak demand in the winter and summer due to heating and cooling pushing it up to 31 gigawatts, which is roughly what the state's entire energy network produces yearly. Alabama, due to their developed nuclear sector, 10% over the national average, is able to be a net energy exporter. Hydroelectric and nuclear can work together. In fact, both are quite complementary to one another, but when nuclear cannot be used and hydroelectric isn't feasible, does this mean you need coal or natural gas? Right now it does, but it doesn't have to. The energy of tomorrow is not nuclear alone, nor is it only renewables. While we continue to experiment with new sources of energy, the 3 primary sources of energy as we advance into the 21st century will almost certainly be renewables, nuclear, and hydroelectric, the energy trifecta, as I have dubbed it. It's a complementary trifecta of energy which makes up for the shortcomings of the others. This doesn't mean there aren't specific uses for other types of power like geothermal, but efficient exploitation of geothermal is few and far between and dependent mostly on geological fixtures often protected under environmental standards. So ignoring geothermal, we focus now on solar and wind. These reservoirs are huge, by the way. Wheeler and Guntersville, both of them are 271 square kilometers in size or bigger. That's a lot of real estate. You could put wind in that lake and it wouldn't hurt very much. Even if it would be minuscule generation, it would be supplementary and aid the network overall. Turn your attention away from America briefly. Let's go to Morocco. Solar efficiency is actually dependent on location. The further from the equator, generally, the less you can get out of it. There are multiple issues that can be seen across the Middle East and Africa, where poor water management has caused reservoirs and lakes to begin drying up, causing the Iranians to even consider abandoning their capital. Now, while Tehran is about to be abandoned, Morocco is protecting their lakes from evaporation by covering them in solar panels, as they call it, photovoltaic power. Evaporation is projected to be lowered by as much as 30%, protecting Morocco's water reserves while also producing a lot of power. Current plans to build 25 acres of solar panels on the water will produce 1.3 gigawatts of electricity across 22,000 panels. A panel in Morocco being bombarded with solar energy year-round easily is hit with over 2,000 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. It can be expected to convert that into 400 kilowatts of energy per year per panel. Take the same panel and put it into South England, and it makes around 175 kilowatt hours. Obviously, you need to lean into the strengths of solar and the strengths of nuclear. You'll need a field twice the size of the ones in Morocco to produce the same power in New York, so why bother? Or rather, work solar into urban planning and use solar where solar saturation is highest. Death Valley, hell, most of the state of Nevada for that fact, makes up a giant, mostly uninhabited area which can produce mass amounts of solar energy, perhaps enough to power Nevada on its own, California, and maybe even Arizona. Not that it would necessarily be needed, but if you're an American, you have noticed the mass building of uniform suburban structures. What if the roofs had solar panels? Your average panels lose 0.5% of efficiency per year. Assume maintenance intervals are every 20 years. Your average suburban roof has a surface area of anywhere between 1,700 and 2,500 square feet. So we'll set it at 2,100 just to meet in the center and start converting it to meters. That's 195.0964 square meters. We'll drop the decimals and run the math. Now, assuming a neighborhood is built with 200 uniform suburban homes, that's 195 times 200 equaling 39,000 square meters. Cover all of that in solar panels. We can assume probably 2 or 3 panels per roof, then pull up a calculator. According to what I can find, INREL says New York sits in the 3 to 4 kilowatt per hour per square meter per day range during January. We need to do more math. This suburban neighborhood in New York being hit with 4 kilowatt hours per square meter per day with 39,000 square meters of paneling would theoretically be getting hit with 156,000 kilowatt hours overall, discounting variables such as angling, positioning, temperature, the season. There's a lot that goes into it, but for simplicity and brevity, 156,000 kilowatt hours of solar radiation hit the panels daily. That's 365 times a year, but average solar panels are 20% efficient. So trim 156,000 to 20% of its original. Now 31,200 kilowatt hours of solar radiation is converted per day. Now if you multiply that by a year's worth of days, discounting that efficiency spikes in summer and drops in winter, you get an insane number of over 10 million kilowatt hours per year. I'm going to be honest, I redid the calculations 4 times using different sources each time, and each time I got an insane number from a small 200 home system, which supposedly would be outputting roughly 10 gigawatts or 3.1 gigawatts more than Wheeler and Gunnersville Lake's max potentials. Needless to say, after so many tries and a variance of millions of kilowatts per hour per year, with some readings at 7, some 10, once it read 9, I don't fucking know anymore. No one source seems to be able to agree. Either way, you get the gist of it. Implementing solar into urban and suburban planning will allow many urban centers to drastically reduce the energy burden that they create on the grid. Use hydroelectric for energy, flood control, economic opportunity creation, opening up maritime transit routes, and creating reservoirs that can feed nuclear plants. Use those nuclear plants where renewables are the least efficient. And use solar within urban centers, on the sides of skyscrapers or suburban roofs, alongside wind in the countryside. If you do this, you will create a system that produces very little waste, a lot of economic opportunity, and a lot of energy flexibility and redundancy. Redundancy is important. It's often neglected. Look at Spain's blackouts earlier this year in 2025. They've been moving to renewables and away from nuclear, and they began having mass blackouts. As people transition from nuclear and fossils to purely renewables, they will find that during winter months they may be failing, which is the most important time for your grid to not be failing. You will need redundancy. Solar is not alone the answer. Nuclear is not alone the answer. And hydro can't pull all the weight itself. No single energy source will ever be the end-all be-all until we crack fusion. And even then, you still want redundancy for redundancy's sakes. So that's about it. The energy trifecta is the way forward. There's no winner in the solar versus nuclear debate. It's just losers on both sides. The more that you argue, the less that gets done. You have to work together on this. It's something you have to work together on. Otherwise, it goes nowhere. Otherwise, there is no energy revolution. Otherwise, by whatever time point the government has set, you're not going to make it because you can't agree. But you have to agree. You have to, or nothing will happen. Special thanks to Gangsta Plays, Panchak, The Irishman, Samay Kashap, Jonah Greenbaum, Lincoln T.C. Payton, Dedrin, Steve Hayes, Luther Manhole, Santiago Soto, Daniello, Boosgumps, Cyclonus777, can't say that still, Legrand Puba, Justin, Von Kale, Ian Riley, Reggie Flores, and Tommy Leah 1, and to my scones and taxpayers, thank you very much for donating. Please join the Discord and ping me to receive your rolls. I'll see you in the next one.